they would find my stuff a little bit too scientific in many ways. But I had one of Britain's top mediums who will remain anonymous because she doesn't want to be mentioned who she is, but most people in this country will know her by name. Right. She emailed me about 6 months ago, and she said, I've just read your book and it's blown my mind. She said, because your book's explained how my spirit guides work. And I've always suspected my spirit guides were in fact one being, and that being is clearly my daemon. But she said, it's how I came across your book. And she said, I have had a life full of weird things happen to me, but finding your book was the weirdest. She was on a tube train in London going to an interview at the BBC. And as the train drew into a station, there was a lady sitting opposite her. And the lady stood up and pushed her bag forward. And as she pushed her bag forward, a book fell out and fell at the feet of the medium. The medium picked the book up to hand it back to the lady, and the lady just looked at her straight in the eye and said, no, this is for you, you must read this, and got off the train. The medium was so stunned, she looked at the book, and it was my first book. And she said, I started flicking through the pages and thought, my God, this is important. She said, as if my spirit guide told me this is important. She got off the train, she went up to the higher levels, phoned up the BBC and said, I'm not coming in for the interview, I'll come in tomorrow, there's something more important I have to do. She went back to her hotel room and she read that book and she finished it at 4:00 the next morning. And she said, it's changed my life. And things like that, I keep getting from round the world. People tell me stories about how they encountered my book. It's weird, very, very weird. Other people have said it's something to do with 2012. Okay. And I have no idea about that. Another gentleman, an Indian gentleman, who is one of the world's top pediatricians. You know, he's a professor of pediatrics. Spends a lot of time traveling the world with Kofi Annan, and he met me a few months ago, and he was very keen to know more about me. He wanted to know where I'd been born, what date of birth, my location of birth and everything. And he said, I'll come back to you when I have some time. And he had me hold certain things and asked me what sensations I was getting. I still don't know what he was up to or why, because he didn't come back to me, but it's weird. It's weird.
Do you think that this weirdness, as you describe, actually is also a phenomena that will increase if you indeed recognize the weirdness and that it's real and that it's affecting your life, meaning that it's kind of a feedback loop, I guess, in one sense, that the more you open up to it, the more you will start to see it happen. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, totally. You know, it does seem to be that the messages are getting louder and louder and louder day on day. It's getting more and more. And as Alan said to me a couple of days ago, he said it will build up. He said, you're manipulating your reality around you. And he said, you need to listen to what your reality is trying to tell you, because, you know, the coincidences are now piling up. You know, that even today when I was talking to, I had a meeting today with J.B. Priestley's son, Tom Priestley, because I'm doing a platform event at the National Theatre in London on the 24th of July. I've been invited down there to talk on the time theories of a guy called J.W. Dunn, which is again another area I can spin off into if we need to.
And just briefly, both Dunn and Priestley, they have written similar books, isn't that right? It's still in novel form, isn't it?
Yeah, J.B. Priestley was profoundly affected by a book written in the 1930s by a guy called J.W. Dunn called An Experiment with Time. And in An Experiment with Time, Dunn was fascinated by precognitive dreams. And he found that he had had one or two phenomenally odd precognitive dreams. And in these dreams, he subsequently discovered that the precognitive dream was not about the event, but it was about him reading about the event. In other words, he had a precognition about him reading a newspaper article, for example. He was so fascinated by this that he wrote this book called called An Experiment with Time. He came up with a fascinating theory about how time may work, and in the idea that we travel through time as an observer, but time is static, that all time exists out there as a permanent present. Everything that can happen and has happened exists out there as a permanent in now. It is human consciousness that travels through it and views it as it travels along, like a train travels along a rail track.
Yes.
The rail track and the stations are still there when you've gone through them. It's just that your view through the window has changed, which was quite fascinating. But J.B. Priestley, the playwright, was so fascinated by the theories of J.W. Dunn that he wrote a series of plays called his Time Plays. And the first one was called I Have Been Here Before, and I'll come back to that play in a second. Mm-hmm. But the second one was called Time and the Conways. And in Time and the Conways, it is in 3 acts, but the second act has the most amazing time slip, where the central character, finds herself 30 years in the future. And then the final act is her going back into the past again, because she's 30 years in the future and she sees the implications of the things that people do. And again, that was Priestley trying to apply the theories of J.W. Dunn. And this is what I'll be lecturing or talking about at the National Theatre. And I'll be on stage with Professor Jeff Forshaw, who is one of Britain's youngest particle physicists. Brilliant, brilliant guy. Who, by the way, admitted to me last time I met him, and get this one, and this is one of the world's top particle physicists. He said to me, we know that every electron in the universe knows the location of every other electron. Mm-hmm. This is science. This is not some guy writing New Age. This is a professor of particle physics at Manchester, where they discovered so many things at the turn of the last century. Yes. But going back to the other play that J.B. Priestley did, which was called I Have Been Here Before, and that's based upon the theories of the eternal recurrence of a Russian philosopher called Peter Ouspensky. And Ouspensky's theories were probably the most influential on my own theories. And he posits, rather like I do, that at the time of your death, you go back to the time of your life and you live your life over and over and over again. And it's a concept. It's called the eternal recurrence, and it's been known since 2,000 years. People have known about this idea.
And this is the Ouspensky who was working together with Gurdjieff for a while, wasn't it?
With Gurdjieff, yes.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very interested in Ouspensky and Gurdjieff for differing reasons, but the fourth way, which is very much the ideas of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, is very much in keeping with my theories. Totally, as is theosophy. There are so many esoteric belief systems. For instance, my first book is suggested reading for the world's largest esoteric training group called the Servants of the Light. And again, if you check out and you go onto the website of the Servants of the Light, you will find that the top lady in there, a lady called Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, actually said that Anthony Peake's book is required it's not required reading, but it is of profound importance to our belief system, because Anthony is putting forward scientific theories that we've known as occultists for the last 300 or 400 years.
That's interesting.
It's even that freaking, yeah.
Yeah. So,
in fact,
go ahead.
I was just going to say I've been invited. I've actually given lectures to the Servants of the Light twice, and Dolores, is really just fascinated by my stuff. Are
they based out of the US or England, or?
They're based out of England. Dolores lives in the Channel Islands, but she spends an awful lot of time in America. Fascinatingly interesting. And again, they took on board my Damon Eidolon dyad. They said, no, absolutely. This is exactly what we have known for years. And most esoteric traditions have this whole concept. I find it amazing. Even Scientology has a concept called the operating thetan. Mm-hmm. It's my daemon. It spins out. There are the Book of Urantia, which is another esoteric group. They have a concept which is absolutely identical, the thought adjuster, absolutely identical to my daemon. But none of these guys are doing science. They're doing the esoteric belief systems. It's the same thing. It's just I'm proving the science.
And that's always interesting in that sense, because that means that the fields in that sense are beginning to overlap, and this has been mentioned as well from I guess prophetic sources, that this is also something that in one way needs to take place, if you know what I mean, in regards to the the importance and the development even of human consciousness, that we need to not only have an esoteric theory about it or an idea about it, but we also need to understand it from a scientific point of view, because that will help. I mean, not everyone is laid towards the esoteric type of thinking, if you know what I mean. And some people actually need the science because they're just hardwired in that way. It feels like that they need to have the science put in front of their eyes in order to understand it in another way, if you know what I mean.
I do, but that's the whole frustration of it all. That if you guide people to the latest areas of particle physics, it's like black magic. You have particles that disappear and reappear. You have quantum leaping. You have action at a distance, something called the EPR paradox, whereby there are two objects both traveling in different directions at vast speeds, and they instantaneously communicate with each other. You've got you don't even need anything mystical. There's enough mystical things going on in particle physics, and any particle physicist that turns around and says he understands what's going on is lying. They don't know. They haven't got a clue. We are in exactly the same position scientifically as we were in 1901, when effectively the Einsteinian revolution came along and the quantum revolution came along. There are too many things that we cannot explain. We can't explain dark matter. We can't explain dark energy. Most of the universe is missing. It doesn't balance. But the scientists don't want to talk about these things because they don't have the answers. But to me, it's the concept of the black swan, which is the idea that if something doesn't fit in, you have to investigate it.
That's right.
To ignore it is silly and it is stupid.
Yeah.
I was interested you were talking about predictions and predicting things. It's been pointed out to me that Philip K. Dick predicted me. And now this is really, really odd. And I even find it still strange. Philip K. Dick wrote a novel in 1966, I think it was, called Counterclock World. And in Counterclock World, there is a character who comes up with this revolutionary new theory about what happens to human consciousness at the point of death. Philip K. Dick called this person Anarch Peake.
Okay, there you go.
Isn't that weird?
How about that, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
wait, did you have this pointed out to you, or have you read the book before that?
No, it was pointed out to me in a lecture. I was doing a lecture in Bolton over here in the UK. And again, there's a whole story of a whole series of the most bizarre synchronicities that surrounded this particular night. And it's called the Cordoba effect by an associate of mine called Mick. And I'm hoping that Mick will be putting some more... You'll find all this on my blog site, by the way. Mick has put a whole thing about the Cordoba effect. And Mick explains that night from his point of view. But effectively, I'd not heard of this story at all. And I knew of the story, but I hadn't read it. And it was them that turned around to me and said, he's predicted you. Now, I don't believe that. I just think it's an interesting coincidence, but it is a significant coincidence, which probably has some deeper meaning that is somewhat beyond me. But it is odd, I have to say.
Oh, very odd. What do you think is the deal, so to speak, with Philip K. Dick then? I mean, he was able to tap into this for some reason. People have talked about his Valis book, for instance. There's other things going on there.
I turn around to people and I say, read my book, then read Valis. Valis is a fictionalized, because of course it's not fiction, because it's based upon the events that took place in March of 1974 to Philip K. Dick, which he called his exegesis. And you read his book, and then you read mine, then read his. It's as if he'd read my theory and then applied it. He also wrote another story called Ubik. And Ubik has a group of individuals who are living in a state called half-life, which is in the final few seconds of their life. And they're reliving and being able to go back and relive their lives. It's incredible. Philip K. Dick could have written my book for me. And that's why I'm delighted now to be in contact with Tessa Dick, who was Philip K. Dick's fifth wife. And Tessa was with Phil through all of his theophany and all the weird and wonderful things that happened to him in those few years. And Tessa is now a member of my forum and has already made contributions. And I'm very, very excited about that because Tessa was there. And
would you would you put William Blake? We talked about him before. Would you put him in the same